It's July 2020. While the world grapples with lockdowns, Herbert Diess stands before Volkswagen's board with the most audacious plan in automotive history. He wants to turn the 83-year-old German automaker into Europe's second-largest software company after SAP. Bigger than BMW, Mercedes, and every other automaker combined, even bigger than Tesla. The numbers are staggering. Billions of euros, thousands of software engineers, and a promise to revolutionize how 40 million vehicles operate worldwide. CARIAD would be Volkswagen's Silicon Valley, but built with German precision and efficiency. In hindsight, that was part of the problem. Welcome to Connecting the Dots, the channel where we follow the breadcrumbs to predict where disruptions will take us. Diess wanted CARIAD to rocket Porsche, Audi, and VW into the future, but it's like someone fired the thrusters in reverse. Within 4 years, VW's software division would burn through billions of euros and show huge losses. They'd deliver cars so broken that 10,000 vehicles sat in parking lots waiting for technicians with laptops to manually install software. They'd expose 800,000 customers' private data through a security breach so basic it made cybersecurity experts cringe. They delayed Porsche's, Audi's, and VW's plans to release new models and forced them to launch others with outdated software. And they'd ultimately force VW to tie their future with a Chinese startup and pay $5.8 billion to an American startup for the technology they couldn't build themselves. If ever there was a flop, this was it, and all the blame landed on Diess, who was ultimately replaced. But here's the thing, Diess wasn't the problem. He was just the guy who tried to solve it. But if Diess was in charge, how can I say it wasn't his fault? And if he knew what he was doing, why did Volkswagen's software division collapse so catastrophically? And what does this story tell us about the future of manufacturing in Europe, in America, and in China? Let's connect the dots. But before we do, if you like my videos, please smash that like button. It really helps if it's early in the video. Now buckle up and get ready, because Volkswagen's software fiasco is more than a company failure. It's a warning of how resistance to change can summon massive disruption. And disruptions are never boring. Chapter 1. Vision without power. To understand why CARIAD was built and why it failed, we need to understand the man behind it, Herbert Diess. The outsider from BMW who was brought in to save Volkswagen. The reformer who saw the Tesla and Chinese threats, years before anyone else. The CEO who tried to transform the company from the inside out only to be crushed by the very system he was hired to reform. Let's enter the time machine and see how it happened. It's late 2019 and Herbert Diess is starting to panic. He wasn't born at Volkswagen, he didn't come up through the Audi or Porsche ranks or spend decades navigating Wolfsburg politics. He came from BMW, where he'd helped launch the i3 and i8, and joined VW in 2015 just as the Dieselgate scandal exploded. That timing made him both an outsider and untouchable. He hadn't caused the mess, and for a brief moment, that gave him room to think differently. But by 2019, that room was shrinking fast. Tesla had just launched the Model Y. Their Shanghai Gigafactory was coming online. And Elon Musk was talking publicly about how Tesla consolidated dozens of vehicle computers into a small handful of software-defined systems, exactly what VW couldn't do. Diess saw the storm coming with terrifying clarity. While his colleagues debated incremental improvements, he was studying Tesla's manufacturing data. Their factories required 10 times fewer workers than VW's. Their cars had 10 times fewer parts, and their software could be updated overnight, something VW's vehicles couldn't do at all. The math was brutal. If VW didn't automate, didn't move faster, didn't write its own code, the company wouldn't just fall behind. It might not survive. Diess calculated that their inefficient factories and slow pace would cost tens of thousands of jobs within a decade. He knew that to introduce massive change, all vectors in the company must be aligned. So to get VW's top management on board, Diess tried showing them the extent of the threat. Despite that, too many managers remained opposed to the mere thought of change. Diess decided to shake the tree and did something unprecedented. He invited Elon Musk to address by video Volkswagen's top 200 executives. The meeting was electric. Musk walked VW's leadership through Tesla's vertical integration, their software approach, and how they'd achieved what German engineers thought impossible, mass-producing electric vehicles profitably. Some executives were genuinely inspired, but most were openly hostile. To the hundreds of senior VW managers who had spent their entire careers in Wolfsburg, Diess still felt like a BMW infiltrator. His constant Tesla comparisons made them bristle. His push for automation sparked fear. His warnings about job losses weren't seen as calls to action, but as threats to the order they knew and loved, to the way things were always done at Volkswagen, and come to think of it, to their cozy positions. We need to move like Tesla, Diess told anyone who would listen. Their Berlin Gigafactory will be years ahead of anything we're building. Their margins are in a different league. If we don't catch up on software, we're finished. But to many longtime VW managers, the real problem wasn't Tesla. It was Diess himself. He spoke the language of Silicon Valley, not Wolfsburg. He talked about disruption while they valued stability. He was the outsider CEO trying to tear down everything they'd built. The system began to push back. Labor representatives demanded job guarantees. The supervisory board split between political stakeholders and the labor union, and the powerful Porsche PX families wanted consensus, not revolution. Brand executives resisted his plans to centralize software development. Diess was told to stop talking publicly about Tesla. The changes he planned met resistance from every corner of the company. The very urgency that made him effective made him unbearable in an institution allergic to change. By 2022, they'd had enough. Herbert Diess was pushed aside and replaced by Oliver Blume, a company insider who promised stability over disruption. The tragic irony? Within months of Diess's departure, VW began announcing the very plant closures and job cuts he'd predicted. Under Blume's leadership, the company quietly started implementing many of the changes Diess had advocated: automation, software centralization, Tesla-style urgency. But they did it slower, less boldly, and far too late to matter. Diess wasn't just early, he was isolated, hired to disrupt but never truly accepted. And when the moment came to choose between comfort and change, VW's culture did what it was designed to do. It protected itself. In a founder-led company, the structure would have bent around the vision. At VW, the structure broke the visionary instead. Having the right diagnosis and having the power to cure the patient are two very different things, and VW was about to prove just how different they could be. I want to share something that's become crucial in my online life: NordVPN. They're sponsoring this video, but I've been happily using them for years across all my devices. I first heard about NordVPN from creators like PewDiePie and MKBHD, but what pushed me to start using it was a conversation with a bright friend who saw where the world was heading. She said, "Always use a top VPN. The world is changing fast and you have no idea how important your online footprint could soon become." She was proven right. Online freedom isn't free. It needs defending, not with protest signs or politics, but with encryption. Encryption protects your privacy and shields your activity from prying eyes. She explained that ISPs and data brokers keep and sell records of our browsing history, including real-time location data, and we don't want our data falling into the hands of advertisers, scammers, or worse. Then she added, "Society is changing. If one day a bad government gets into power, you don't want to regret visiting a website 2 years back without a good VPN to encrypt your connection and keep you private." She recommended NordVPN, which is bulletproof, fast, and easy to use. Its zero logs policy is third-party audited, so they can't track you even if ordered to. Their RAM-based servers wipe all data on every reboot, and their double VPN feature routes traffic through 2 servers for extra privacy. The world is changing. People's browsing history and location history are often used against them. What's fine today can be banned tomorrow, so VPNs aren't just about watching blocked videos and avoiding hackers. They let you browse freely without feeling under surveillance and protect your digital life from potential future risks, whatever they might be. NordVPN is my investment in safety. To get started, use my link nordvpn.com/dots and get 4 extra months on their 2-year plan plus a 30-day money-back guarantee. Go to nordvpn.com/dots and give them a try. I think you'll find the added peace of mind as valuable as I do. Chapter 2. Built to Fail. When Herbert Diess announced Volkswagen's new car software organization in 2020, the vision was crystal clear. Volkswagen would create an independent division by consolidating 3,000 software engineers from across its subsidiaries. Over 5 years, it planned to invest 7 billion euros, grow to 10,000 employees, and build a unified operating system that would power every vehicle across all 12 VW Group brands, from budget Škodas to luxury Bentleys. The strategy was sound: one software stack, one development team, one coherent digital experience that could compete with Tesla's seamless integration. Diess understood that software would become the primary differentiator in the future of mobility, and bringing it 100% in-house was the right call. CARIAD was Diess's attempt to import new DNA into VW, the kind of lean, tech-focused approach he'd seen work at BMW. To him, it represented a cultural reset that could break VW's entrenched habits. But VW insiders didn't want any new DNA. To them, it wasn't just a software project, it was BMW logic dressed up in VW funding. Worse, it was Diess's pet mission, and they were determined to resist it. To lead CARIAD, Diess recruited Dirk Hilgenberg from BMW. Hilgenberg had spent decades in software-intensive roles and brought much-needed tech expertise. But the appointment backfired. To many inside VW, it confirmed their worst fears: that Diess wasn't just copying BMW methods, he was importing BMW people. The Whisper Network spoke of a stealth takeover, and that only deepened the resistance against CARIAD from within. CARIAD was imposed from the top onto an organization that had spent decades perfecting the art of brand autonomy. Diess knew what needed to be done, but he was forced to build it within VW's existing framework, a framework that was fundamentally hostile to his vision. Startups usually start with a small group which forms a plan and then grows organically. In sharp contrast, CARIAD was formed by grouping together 3,000 existing employees from different divisions. This created a managerial nightmare with the workforce severely mismatching required technologies, having different work practices, and maintaining allegiance to their original divisions. As a company insider explains in this wonderful report by Philip Roche, the Audi people built Audi structures. The Porsche people created Porsche processes. The Volkswagen people made their own systems. Instead of a lean software company, they created a patchwork of mini corporations. The result? I had 17 status meetings per week, repeating the same things. Instead of coding, developers made PowerPoints. VW touted having 3,000 software employees and planned to grow to 10,000 in 5 years. To me, this seemed like an excellent recipe for producing spaghetti code, so I started posting on it on X. I showed GIFs with tons of spaghetti, contrasting CARIAD's by then 5,000 engineers with Tesla's mere 21 on their autopilot team. I showed that Linux was written by a single person, Linus Torvalds, Windows 10 by just 4,000 engineers, and that Tesla developed Model S with just 2,000 employees in the entire company, designing everything from operating system to battery, production line, and suspension. If instead of boasting about thousands of engineers, they had hired one visionary and given them freedom, things would have been different. But corporate culture couldn't give anyone the required freedom. It was like VW's leadership thought that brute force was enough to close the software gap, throw enough money and engineers at the problem, and innovation would follow. This was how Volkswagen had solved many manufacturing challenges. But software doesn't work like stamping metal or assembling engines, and VW's corporate DNA was about to prove toxic to the very thing it was trying to create. From day one, CARIAD was structurally compromised. Despite being created to centralize software development, it was never given independent budget control. Funding came from individual brands, Audi, Porsche, VW, who retained ultimate power over what got built and how. CARIAD was immediately saddled with what Diess never intended, the legacy burden. He had created it to focus on Platform 2.0, a Tesla-like architecture built from scratch, a clean slate unified software stack with one central brain, one system to control everything. But instead of building that future, CARIAD was dragged into the past. Each brand dumped its old systems onto the division, forcing it to continue developing two outdated platforms, 1.1 and 1.2. The team found itself interfacing with controllers from hundreds of different suppliers on two different platforms, while implementing an endless stream of brand-specific special requests from everyone from Porsche to Skoda. Instead of running free, CARIAD was wading through molasses. But the structural problems only enabled a deeper dysfunction, the brand wars. The moment CARIAD opened its doors, the brand politics that had defined VW for decades moved inside. This wasn't passive resistance, it was active warfare. Audi refused to use Porsche components, even when they were technically superior. Porsche developed their own platform for just 250,000 cars annually, rather than share anything with Audi's much larger volumes. VW demanded that everything be compatible with their mass-market legacy systems. Each brand saw CARIAD not as a shared future, but as a service bureau for their own priorities. They wanted the cost savings of centralization without giving up any control over what got built. The politics were vicious. Brands built parallel software teams to compete with CARIAD's work. They blocked key decisions by withholding funding or demanding endless revisions. Most destructively, they leaked negative stories to the media, turning every CARIAD delay into ammunition against Diess's strategy. We developed the same feature 6 times because each brand wanted a different version, one insider revealed. Porsche's resistance was particularly damaging, kindergarten-level behavior that burned millions in duplicated effort. But Porsche had leverage. The Porsche and Piëch families controlled VW through their ownership stakes, giving Porsche's demands extra weight in every decision. The fundamental problem was that nobody had veto power. No one could say stop to the endless demands for customization. To build unified software, CARIAD needed clear decision-making authority, but VW's consensus-driven culture made that impossible. Diess found himself caught between his vision of unified development and the reality of VW's power structure. He needed the brands to cooperate, but they saw cooperation as surrender. He needed decisive leadership, but VW's system was designed for stakeholder balance, not rapid decision-making. Perhaps most damning of all, this supposed software company barely developed any software internally. Instead, it became an expensive middleman, reviewing code from external suppliers and passing it to brands, exactly the fragmented approach Diess had tried to eliminate. The tragedy wasn't that Diess lacked the right vision or strategic understanding. His diagnosis was correct. VW needed unified software development to compete with Tesla and Chinese startups. His solution was logical: centralize, standardize, and build in-house capability. The tragedy was that VW's institutional antibodies immediately went to work, absorbing CARIAD into the existing system rather than allowing it to transform that system. The very culture that made change necessary also made change impossible. Volkswagen's software division became a €14 billion monument to a simple truth: you can't decree a startup into existence inside a corporation designed to resist the risk-taking and rapid iteration that software development requires. And the deeper Diess tried to dig VW out of its software hole, the more obvious it became that the system would rather bury him than change itself. A missed fork in the road. At this point, VW had a choice: take a painful leap forward and build a focused software-first platform, or cling to what worked in the past. Playing safe, they tried to do both. That decision doomed everything that followed. Chapter 3. Attention is all you need. While CARIAD was burning through billions trying to satisfy everyone, Tesla was doing something completely different, focusing on one thing at a time. When Tesla launched Model S, they built it on a single software platform. When they launched Model X, they used the same platform. Model 3, same one. Model Y, same platform too. By 2020, Tesla had one unified software stack running across their entire vehicle lineup, exactly what Volkswagen was spending €14 billion trying to achieve. In sharp contrast, CARIAD was drowning in complexity. Instead of killing the old platforms and betting everything on the future, VW tried to do everything at once. They maintained Platform 1.1 for existing vehicles, developed Platform 1.2 as a bridge solution, and promised Platform 2.0 as their revolutionary future. 3 platforms, 3 sets of teams, 3 different technical architectures, 3 times the complexity, 3 times the cost, and 0 times the focus. In fact, that's understating it. Platform 2.0 did not get a third of the effort. It got leftovers, constantly sidelined as not urgent, while the company fought the other platform's daily fires. This wasn't Herbert Diess's original plan. He had envisioned CARIAD as a lean organization focused entirely on Platform 2.0, the future of VW's software. But the brands wouldn't let go of their legacy systems. They demanded that CARIAD maintain and improve the platforms they were already using, even as they insisted on building something completely new. The result was organizational chaos masquerading as strategic planning. Platform 1.1 was a nightmare inherited from the early days of VW's electric push, the software that powered the troubled ID.3 launch, with cars sitting in parking lots waiting for manual updates. Platform 1.2 was supposed to offer a fresher user experience and fix 1.1's problems while maintaining compatibility. And Platform 2.0 was meant to be the clean slate that would finally deliver on Diess's vision. Each platform had its own engineering teams, its own technical requirements, and its own political constituencies within VW, and all 3 starved for attention. While CARIAD's engineers were spread across 3 competing priorities, Tesla's team was laser-focused on perfecting one platform. While VW was having meetings about which platform should get priority, Tesla was shipping over-the-air updates that added new features to every car they'd ever built. The mathematics of attention are brutal in software development. A team focused on one goal can achieve exponential progress. A team split between 3 goals achieves fractional progress on each. Diess understood this, which is why he had wanted CARIAD to focus exclusively on the future. But VW's consensus-driven culture made it impossible to abandon anything. Every stakeholder had a constituency to protect. Every platform had a business case for continued investment. The brands made it worse by treating Platform 2.0 as a distant aspiration rather than an urgent necessity. They needed Platform 1.2 to work for their 2022 and 2023 model launches. Platform 2.0 wouldn't be ready until 2025 at the earliest, assuming everything went perfectly. So the practical decision was always to prioritize the immediate over the transformational. Fix 1.1's bugs today. Get 1.2 working for next year's launches. Maybe if there's time and budget left over, make some progress on 2.0. By the time CARIAD's teams got around to the future platform, they were already exhausted from firefighting the present. China's EV startups, meanwhile, were taking the Tesla approach to an extreme. Companies like NIO and XPeng built their entire software stacks from scratch, with no legacy burden and no competing priorities. They could iterate quickly because they weren't maintaining 3 different architectures simultaneously. The irony was that VW's attempt to be comprehensive made them less competitive, not more. By trying to solve every problem at once, they solved none of them well. Tesla's secret wasn't just superior engineering talent, and it certainly wasn't unlimited resources. Their secret was knowing that attention is the scarcest resource in software development, and that focus, not features, determines who wins the race. VW learned this lesson the hard way, spending years and billions of euros discovering that you can't multitask your way to innovation. By the time they finally killed Platform 2.0 and consolidated around 1.2, the window for catching up with Tesla had already closed. Focus isn't optional in the software business. Without attention, even 14 billion euros gets scattered into failure. Chapter 4. The Cultural Trap. Even if Herbert Diess had the power required to solve CARIAD's structural problems and force the brands to focus on a single platform, there was still one insurmountable obstacle: Volkswagen's culture. German engineering culture had made VW one of the world's most successful automakers. Precision, hierarchy, perfectionism, and exhaustive testing had built Audi's and Porsche's reputation for quality and reliability. But those same virtues were poison for software development. While Tesla's engineers were shipping code and fixing bugs in real time, Volkswagen's developers were waiting for alignment. While Chinese startups were testing features with live customers, VW was appointing committees, for appointing other committees, for defining focus groups, for determining which features should be added at all. The cultural mismatch ran deeper than just process. It was philosophical. Traditional automotive engineering is about getting things right the first time. You can't recall 1,000,000 cars because you want to try a different suspension setup. Hardware mistakes are expensive and permanent, so automotive culture evolved to avoid them through exhaustive planning, extensive testing, and consensus-based decision-making. Software engineering is the opposite. You ship quickly, learn from real users, and iterate based on feedback. The best software companies embrace controlled failure as a learning mechanism. They'd rather launch something 80% perfect and improve it weekly than spend 2 years perfecting something that might be obsolete by the time it ships. CARIAD was staffed with people trained in the automotive mindset who were trying to build software with hardware thinking. The results were predictable. Instead of rapid iteration, CARIAD had extensive documentation requirements. Instead of small teams making quick decisions, they had committees ensuring every stakeholder was consulted. Instead of move fast and break things, they had measure twice, cut once, which works for manufacturing but kills software velocity. The comfort culture made it worse. CARIAD offered excellent work-life balance, guaranteed remote work and job security that was unthinkable at Tesla or Chinese EV startups. While Elon Musk was demanding hardcore commitment from his software teams, CARIAD employees were logging off at 5 p.m. and taking their full vacation allowances. This wasn't necessarily wrong. Work-life balance is valuable and sustainable, but it created a pace that was fundamentally uncompetitive with companies where software engineers were working nights and weekends to ship the next breakthrough feature. The hiring practices revealed the deeper problem. When Tesla needed software talent, they hired from Google, Apple, and video game companies, people who lived and breathed code. When CARIAD needed to scale up, they hired automotive engineers and taught them software principles, or brought in IT consultants who had never built consumer products. As one insider lamented, "We had test managers, error managers, project managers, but not a single coder on my team." This wasn't incompetence, it was cultural DNA expressing itself. VW's system had evolved to reward process expertise over product innovation, consensus building over individual brilliance, and risk management over rapid experimentation. The cartel mentality made it worse. I made a video which shows documented proof on how for years German automakers, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, Volkswagen, and Audi had all colluded to suppress innovation in emissions, software, and features. They had agreed not to compete too aggressively, not to rock the boat, not to disrupt the comfortable equilibrium they had established. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend that you do. There's a link in the card above. That culture of don't innovate too fast was exactly what made CARIAD impossible to grow. You can't build a disruptive software company inside a culture designed to avoid disruption. Even Diess's urgency became part of the problem. His constant Tesla comparisons and talk of existential threats made VW employees defensive rather than motivated. Instead of inspiring them to move faster, it reminded them that they were being asked to abandon everything that had made the company successful. The tragedy was that VW had the resources to compete. They had more money than Tesla, access to the same talent pool, and decades of automotive expertise. What they lacked was the cultural permission to fail fast, iterate quickly, prioritize speed over perfection. Moreover, Diess crucially lacked the permission to lead the company into a few years of lower profits and falling stock price as it rebuilds itself. By the time leadership realized that culture was the bottleneck, not capital or capability, it was too late. Tesla had shipped 4 major software updates, while VW was still forming committees to decide which features to prioritize. You can't grow a startup in soil that fears failure, and VW's soil had been engineered over decades to prevent exactly the kind of rapid experimentation that software leadership requires. Herbert Diess had tried to plant Silicon Valley seeds in traditional German ground. The seeds were good, the funding was adequate, and the vision was true, but the environment was hostile, and Diess had no backing. CARIAD's future was doomed from the start. Chapter 5. The Messenger Gets Shot. By 2022, Herbert Diess's warnings were coming true with devastating precision. CARIAD was billions over budget and years behind schedule. The Porsche Macan EV was delayed by a full year. Audi's flagship electric models were pushed back indefinitely. Thousands of ID3 and ID4 vehicles sat in parking lots waiting for technicians with laptops to manually install software updates that should have worked over the air. Everything Diess had predicted about VW's software weakness was manifesting in real time. Everything he had tried to prevent was happening anyway. But CARIAD's delays were just the excuse. The real problem was that Diess had become VW's Cassandra, accurate in his predictions, ignored in the boardroom, and ultimately punished for warning of a bleak future when the preferred story was of rainbows and sunlight. The board could tolerate software problems. Those could be fixed with time and money. What they and the Works Council couldn't tolerate was Diess's relentless push for fundamental transformation. Shorter production cycles like Tesla's, massive factory automation, and the uncomfortable truth that avoiding change would mean massive job losses. Diess had warned that without radical efficiency improvements, cutting production time from 30 hours per car to Tesla's 10, Volkswagen would face an existential crisis. To give you a sense of what he meant, the footage in the background shows the ID3 production line 3 years later in 2024. And no, this isn't slow motion. It just looks that way. He pushed for the kind of automated, streamlined manufacturing that could keep VW competitive. But this level of disruption was more than the board and management could handle. His predictions about job losses were particularly toxic. Diess had calculated that without transformation, VW would need to cut 30,000 positions. He wasn't advocating for layoffs. He was warning that layoffs would be inevitable if Volkswagen didn't change. But to the powerful Works Council, this sounded like a CEO threatening their members' livelihoods to justify his radical agenda. Diess wasn't confrontational by nature, but if you see a tsunami heading your way and warning people nicely doesn't help, you kick and scream to catch their attention. His urgency was proportional to the threat he saw coming, which was huge. The supervisory board, dominated by the Porsche PX families and Works Council representatives, had lost patience. CARIAD's problems disrupted profitable product launches and embarrassed the company publicly. Someone had to be held responsible, and between blaming themselves or Diess was the obvious target. The irony was brutal. Diess was displaced for the consequences of problems he had correctly identified but had been prevented from solving. He wanted CARIAD to focus exclusively on Platform 2.0. The brands forced it to maintain 3 platforms simultaneously. He wanted independent budget control for software development. The brands insisted on maintaining their own funding and veto power. He wanted to hire proven software talent from outside the industry. VW's culture demanded consensus and promotion from within. At every crucial decision point, Diess's vision had been compromised by the very stakeholders who now blamed him for the compromised results. The Works Council had opposed his job-cutting warnings, then watched those exact job cuts materialize under his successor. The brand managers had insisted on maintaining their autonomy, then complained when that autonomy prevented unified software development. The supervisory board had demanded consensus building, then criticized the slow pace that consensus building produced. But Diess had made a fatal error in leadership. He had told people what they didn't want to hear repeatedly and publicly without building the political capital to survive being right about an uncomfortable future. His outsider status, an asset when it comes to seeing problems clearly, became a liability when those problems proved intractable. VW's culture could tolerate an outsider who delivered quick wins. It couldn't tolerate an outsider who delivered uncomfortable truths about fundamental changes that would take years to implement and cost tens of thousands of jobs in the process. Volkswagen's PR machine started forming a narrative. Company insiders were anonymously quoted putting the blame on Diess. The media narrative crystallized around CARIAD's most visible failures: software bugs in customer cars, delayed product launches, billions in losses with little to show for it. The complexity of VW's structural resistance, the brand wars, the cultural incompatibility, none of that made for simple headlines. What made headlines was VW's software chief burns through 14 billion euros and fails to deliver. When the supervisory board met in July 2022 to discuss Diess's future, the decision was swift and unanimous. Oliver Blumer, a VW insider who understood the company's political dynamics, would replace the BMW outsider who had tried to revolutionize too much too quickly. The official statement praised Diess's groundbreaking platform-based approaches and his role in advancing the transformation of the company. But the subtext was clear: they were done listening to the messenger. Within months of Diess's departure, VW began implementing many of the changes he had advocated. They streamlined CARIAD's structure, reduced the number of platforms, and imposed more centralized decision-making. But it's too little and too late, so they also announced the exact job cuts and plant closures he had predicted would be necessary if VW doesn't act fast enough. 35,000 positions and multiple factory shutdowns. Failing to heed Diess's warnings, Volkswagen is now paying the price. But they're doing it as if it was always inevitable, with no one acknowledging that things could have turned out differently had they chosen another path. Like Cassandra warning Troy, Diess saw the fall before it came. But instead of acting on the warning, VW shot the messenger and then walked straight into the fire. Chapter 6: Crashing Hard. With Herbert Diess pushed aside, Volkswagen's software problems didn't disappear, they accelerated. The ID.3 and ID.4 launches had already been disasters. Cars rolled off production lines with software so broken that basic functions like over-the-air updates simply didn't work. Thousands of vehicles sat in parking lots for months while technicians manually installed software patches that should have been delivered wirelessly. But the humiliation was just beginning. In 2023, CARIAD suffered a data breach so elementary that cybersecurity experts couldn't believe it was real. The personal information of 800,000 customers was exposed, including the locations and movement patterns of undercover police officers and high-ranking government officials. The breach revealed not just poor security practices, but a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern software systems should be designed and protected. The financial carnage was staggering. CARIAD posted 7.5 billion euros in losses over 3 years while delivering virtually nothing that worked as promised. The division that was supposed to be VW's technological crown jewel had become its most expensive failure in corporate history. Product launches collapsed like dominoes. The Porsche Macan EV, originally scheduled for 2022, was pushed back repeatedly as software continued to fail basic functionality tests. Audi's Project Artemis, once hailed as the future of luxury electric vehicles, was delayed indefinitely. Bentley's ambitious plan to go all-electric by 2030 was quietly put on life support, as it became clear that CARIAD couldn't deliver the software foundation the transition required. Users got fed up and switched their loyalty to other brands. By 2024, the delays had cascaded through VW's entire product pipeline. The 2.0 platform, the unified architecture that was supposed to power all future VW Group vehicles, was pushed back from 2025 to 2028, a 3-year delay that effectively meant starting over. The Trinity project was delayed so many times that it eventually morphed from a sedan into a crossover and moved from Wolfsburg to Slovakia. The market was brutal in its judgment. Every delayed launch meant hundreds of millions in lost revenue. Every software failure damaged VW's reputation further. Every missed deadline gave Tesla and Chinese competitors more time to extend their lead. And then came the final humiliation. In late 2024, Volkswagen announced a joint venture with Rivian, the American electric vehicle startup. VW would pay $5.8 billion for access to Rivian's software platform, the very capability that CARIAD had been created to develop in-house. This was the white flag. After spending 14 billion euros and 4 years trying to build software internally, VW was admitting defeat and buying from a startup what it should have built itself. The irony was crushing. VW had been handed a pathway to success on a platter and refused to take it. Dieselgate, for all its devastation, had created a unique opportunity. The scandal forced VW to pivot to electric vehicles, giving them regulatory cover and financial justification for radical change. Combined with Diess's foresight and his unbashfulness about learning from Tesla, VW could have become one of the world's leaders in EVs and software-defined vehicles. Instead, they decided to go slow and steady and fell behind everyone. The Rivian deal wasn't a strategy, it was an apology. The numbers told the story of a catastrophic strategic failure. CARIAD's 7.5 billion euros in losses, plus the 5.8 billion euros Rivian payment, plus the billions in delayed product revenue added up to one of the most expensive corporate mistakes in automotive history. More than money, VW had lost time, the one resource that can't be bought back. While they had spent years fighting internal battles and maintaining 3 software platforms, Tesla had shipped dozens of major updates, and Chinese startups had gone from concept to market leadership. The window for catching up was closing fast, and VW was still trying to figure out how to climb through it. This wasn't just slow execution or technical difficulties. This was a complete, humiliating implosion of a strategy that should have worked, if the organization had been willing to change as much as it claimed it wanted to. Herbert Diess had warned them this day would come. He had begged them to act before it was too late. He had offered them a path to avoid exactly this scenario. Instead, Volkswagen chose to learn the hard way that ignoring the warning doesn't make the future less real. It just makes it harder when it arrives. Chapter 7. Not just VW. Volkswagen's failure wasn't happening in isolation. It was part of a broader European tragedy. An entire continent choosing comfort over competitiveness and sometimes misled idealism over outcomes. While VW was burning billions on software they couldn't build, Germany was shutting down its nuclear power plants in the name of fighting climate change, and then burning more coal to keep the lights on. The country that had lectured the world about carbon emissions was increasing its own while making energy more expensive and less reliable. Even Tesla faced this European resistance to urgency. When Elon Musk tried to build Gigafactory Berlin, environmental protesters literally camped in the forests to stop construction. They sued over water usage, tree removal, and potential impacts on local wildlife. The factory that would build zero-emission vehicles was treated as an environmental threat by the very people claiming to care about the environment. The protests weren't really about trees or water. They were about change, about disruption, about someone moving fast enough to make incremental progress look inadequate by comparison. This was the same mindset that had killed CARIAD. Europe's institutions were optimized for process, consensus, and risk management. They were designed to prevent bad things from happening, not to enable great things to happen quickly. Germany's energy policy was a perfect parallel to VW's software strategy. Instead of picking one approach and executing it ruthlessly, they tried to do everything at once: phase out nuclear, scale up renewables, maintain grid stability, and keep costs reasonable. The result was energy chaos, the most expensive electricity in Europe, increasing dependence on Russian gas, and higher carbon emissions than when they started. The same pattern played out across European industries: Airbus versus Boeing in commercial aviation, European chipmakers versus TSMC and Samsung. The examples are almost endless. In every case, European companies had the engineering talent, financial resources, and market access to compete, but they couldn't match the execution speed and risk tolerance of their competitors. The cultural DNA was the same everywhere: prioritize stakeholder consensus over decisive action, risk management over rapid iteration, and process perfection over shipping products. A friend of mine founded an AI startup in Germany and the United States. While that operation closed, she is now busy initiating a new AI startup with the same co-founder as in the previous one. Same founders, same field, but there's one big difference. With the first startup, my friend insisted on basing the company in Germany where she lives, practically forcing the other co-founder to relocate from America to Europe. This time, however, both co-founders are adamant on starting up in America, and my friend is now planning to move there. Never again, she says, about starting a company in Europe, where everything they did was an uphill battle against bureaucracy and never-ending regulations in all levels: municipal, German, and European. They gave up on building their server farm not due to the high cost and availability problem with GPUs, but due to extreme hurdles in obtaining the permits. Realizing the approval process would take nearly a year and then they'd get hit by exorbitant energy prices, they ditched plans of running their own servers and fell back onto offshore solutions. That's just one example of how excessive regulations and bureaucracy forced the company to use alternative solutions. Now she's done trying to fight it in Europe, and if her next company succeeds, it's America that will reap the rewards. Europe blew its chance. France's attempts to build European tech champions were hobbled by labor laws that made it impossible to hire and fire quickly. The Netherlands' semiconductor strategy was undermined by environmental regulations that slowed factory construction. The UK's fintech leadership was threatened by Brexit complexity that made every decision a political negotiation. Across the continent, the pattern was identical: brilliant strategies, adequate resources, and institutional antibodies that prevent execution at competitive speed. China, meanwhile, was doing exactly what Herbert Diess had wanted VW to do. Chinese EV companies like BYD, NIO, and XPeng were iterating software monthly, launching new models annually, and treating speed as the ultimate competitive advantage. They weren't necessarily smarter or better funded than European competitors. They were just willing to move fast and fix problems in real time. The Chinese government had picked electric vehicles as a strategic priority and aligned every policy lever behind that goal. Subsidies, regulations, infrastructure investment, and diplomatic pressure all pointed in the same direction: dominate the EV transition before Western incumbents could adapt. In sharp contrast, Europe's response was typically European. Form committees, conduct studies, propose regulations, and schedule stakeholder consultations. By the time they finished planning, China had already won. The tragedy wasn't that Europe lacked the capability to compete. The tragedy was that European institutions were structurally designed to prevent the kind of rapid adaptation that modern competition requires. VW's board couldn't empower Diess to move at Tesla speed because that would have required abandoning the consensus-driven culture that defined German corporate governance. And Germany couldn't retain its nuclear power plants because that would have required overriding the environmental groups, labor unions, and regional interests that defined German politics. The system was working exactly as designed. It was just designed for a world that no longer existed. Herbert Diess hadn't just been fighting VW's culture, he had been fighting Europe's culture. A culture that valued process over progress, stability over speed, and risk management over risk-taking. In a world where the biggest risk was moving too slowly, Europe had optimized for the opposite problem, and in that optimization lay the seeds of its competitive decline. Chapter 8, A Warning for the West. Volkswagen's woes aren't just a management failure. They are a mirror held up to the West. CARIAD's collapse wasn't about missing a few product deadlines. It was about something deeper, a system that could no longer move fast enough to compete, because it was designed to move slowly on purpose. While Volkswagen spent 4 years and 14 billion euros failing to build a unified software platform, Tesla shipped dozens of major updates to millions of cars already on the road. While CARIAD held requirements meetings, Chinese EV startups like XPeng and NIO were launching new features via over-the-air updates and getting real-world feedback from actual customers. Chinese competitors have taken this to an extreme. BYD went from making batteries to becoming the world's largest EV manufacturer in less than a decade. They're not necessarily smarter than Western automakers, they're just hungry enough to move at internet speed while legacy companies move at committee speed. Even Korea and Japan are adapting faster than Europe. Hyundai's software-first approach to EVs, backed by government coordination and aggressive timelines, is delivering products that European companies are still planning. These aren't technological miracles, they're organizational and cultural choices about how fast you're willing to move. Meanwhile, the West continues to operate like it's managing slow industrial transitions rather than real-time global races. We have environmental impact studies that take 3 years to approve factories building clean energy technology, labor negotiations that prioritize job preservation over competitive survival, regulatory frameworks designed for the automotive industry of 1970, not 2025. Every regulation makes sense in isolation. Every safety requirement has a good reason. Every stakeholder consultation serves a worthy purpose. But collectively, they create a system where doing anything quickly becomes nearly impossible. China's rise isn't just about manufacturing costs or government subsidies, though those help. It's about systemic alignment behind speed and execution. When the Chinese government decides that EVs are strategically important, every policy lever points in the same direction. When Western governments decide something is important, every stakeholder gets a veto. The choice facing the West is becoming stark. Learn to move at competitive speed, or watch competitors who can move at that speed take increasing market share in every industry that matters for the future. CARIAD was a symptom. The disease is Western complacency and rigidity, the comfortable assumption that good intentions and eventual execution will be enough to compete with cultures that prioritize rapid iteration and continuous improvement. Herbert Diess tried to inoculate Volkswagen against this disease. The system rejected the medicine, preferring familiar problems to unfamiliar solutions. Diess's warning shouldn't remain Volkswagen-specific. They should serve as a warning to Europe and the West about our speed problem, and we're still not listening. So here's my question for you. Where do you agree with me, and where was I wrong? What part of CARIAD's failure should be attributed to Diess, and which was forced on him? And what future do you see for manufacturing in the West? Let me know below. I really want to hear your thoughts. If you found this video interesting, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Consider supporting my work on Patreon, YouTube, or X to help me continue making these videos. Visit nordvpn.com/dots to keep your online presence secure and protect yourself from identity theft, scammers, and unwanted surveillance, now with 4 extra months free. For daily insights, come follow me on X at x.com/connectingodots. Until next time, I am connecting the dots, and you are amazing.
When you're up against the wall and you cannot fall, so go on, go on.